All right, hello everyone. Here we are back for a golf glide tutorial here for the fourth hole of the Eagle Peak course. So we're going to be talking about this first tee box here. So let me first kind of start with that, and let's talk a little bit about the power line here. So what I'll typically use here is maybe a 1 power ball, 2 power ball, somewhere in that effect here. And what you'll usually see is kind of a lined divider right around here for where shots need to kind of separate a little bit, which kind of makes things a little bit tricky because, you know, hitting certain landing zones are going to kind of be a little bit tougher. So let's take a look here at kind of what I'd like to ideally do. So let's look at B52 would be kind of my club of choice. You're going to need at least a 4. If you don't have this, I'm going to suggest a Goliath. And kind of the problem with these newer holes that they're setting up is they're kind of setting it up to where length becomes kind of more of a priority. So really, if you don't have these 2 power clubs with very good power number on them, you're going to find yourself kind of in weird landing zone territory here to where you don't have much of a shot. So because length is so important, you know, they have to move up to kind of the highest priority, even though backbone, you know, in terms of accuracy, may be higher than it. So, you know, kind of somewhere around a backbone 7 would be ideal here. Again, because the length is going to come in so much that, you know, if you don't have at least this, and then below that, you know, you can kind of put Saturn, or, you know, technically you can get away with like a Grizzly on this hole or something, but not something that, you know, I'm going to even really recommend or really even go over until, you know, if the update comes and they actually end up fixing that club, which I hope ends up happening, because what was actually going to happen, it was that new Grizzly was going to become better than Goliath, better than Backbone. It was going to basically become your go-to club until you could max B52, which was going to be a good thing. So I'm really hoping that you know, things kind of change for the better in that regard. But let's take a look at this shot and talk about, so what I like to do is kind of land right around here, somewhere around the bunker. Now, what I'll typically try to do here is land this second shot right around this fringe. Ideally, you do want to get it, you know, up to the fringe or close to the fringe, somewhere in that vicinity. And then just kind of roll it gently around here. You might need just a little bit of curl to make this happen as well. So you'll want to play the wind effect. You know, if it's a right pointed wind and it looks like you're kind of bouncing it right in this hill here, and it's pointed towards the left, then you might need to counter curl it against that wind just slightly to kind of hold this line. And that's one of the toughest things is when you aim here, it's going to require a great deal of side spin to get this ball guide to kind of look like this. So you might be at max on pretty much every shot that you do, max to the right, which makes this shot just a little bit harder. Another thing that makes it harder is you're so much towards max that we can only really talk about this for kind of tailwind cases. So this is a very isolated shot. And, you know, if I have backbone 7, getting to this spot in itself is kind of a nightmare. So what it does require is just a little bit of top spin. So let me throw on the numbers here. You know, for the side wind case, I'm going to use about 1.5, give or take. And ideally, this second hop lands maybe just right in front of this fringe, and then it just hops on and just runs its way towards the hole. And with the tailwind, you know, I could potentially start to, you know, get away with just you know, a little bit less here. So maybe about 1, for instance. And you can just kind of tweak that top spin zone as well to as low as maybe 0.5 in kind of a straight situation. Keep in mind that you might have to offset this guide a little bit too. So if I have, for instance, a wind that's pointed just like this, and I'm playing this shot, when I set up this shot, I might want to make sure that my ball guide kind of just barely creeps over here into the fairway, because once it actually lands here, it's going to expand out, and then it will actually stretch to land at this point. So these are the type of things, variables that you need to be thinking. And alternatively, the opposite's going to happen, and that's, we pretty much won't hit this shot for a headwind shot because of how tough it will be to clear this bunker. So that is the one thing that I do want to just kind of, point out to you guys. But keep in mind, that little trick that you'll need once the wind actually affects the ball, it's going to kind of stretch out that bounce. So if you put it towards the front of the fairway in a tailwind, it's going to stretch out, and it's actually going to, and that's kind of where this 0.5 case will come in. So if you could just put that, and then do correct ring play, you're going to be, well played and, potentially win this hole. So that's what you'll be shooting for. And let's start to talk about these wind cases. There's, 3 different cases here. We're pretty much only going to talk about side and tailwind here because the headwind case is going to be so challenging. Maybe if you have kingmakers on, but why would you have kings? So it's like, I really don't even want to even bring up that case for a headwind. And as I mentioned, with the ball guide, it's going to make for a very challenging shot as well. So what I pretty much use is max number, maybe max plus 10, somewhere in there. So side and tail, we'll just say max plus 10 for this case. It's pretty relatively spot on there. That's what you'll need to do. Perfect ball will be, very pivotal for this shot because, the way that this fairway is, it's kind of a weird hill, and then kind of around this second hill is also a weird hill. So great balls can, tend to push your ball over this way, or, great ball right. In some instances, it might roll towards this fringe. Usually doesn't make it over to this bunker unless you did something really wrong. So it is hard to get over here, but again, if you try to cheat down here too much and use too much topspin, you could run into that problem. So definitely something to consider. So, but just try to focus on doing that. Let's start to talk about case 2. Case 2 is actually very, very challenging. With the headwind case, what you typically need to do is you need to cheat this rough line very, very tight and land right here, have the second bounce here, third bounce here, and then just a little bit of run out. You usually don't have much room for error. So if you miss your perfect ball, great ball right, probably in the sand, great ball left, probably clips this rough. So you pretty much kind of have a one out situation. There is an exception to that, and that's if you kind of purposefully kind of aim over to the right and over curl it. But then what happens is if you do that with a perfect ball, you might end up, shooting over here towards the left too much because you have to put so much extra curl. So when we're talking about this blue line down here, odds are you're probably going to need some curl, and it's probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of kind of around half of the screen or so, or a third to a half. Also keep in mind that it's going to be dependent upon the wind. So keep in mind if you have a wind that's pointed this way and it's, of the headwind variety, so, kind of down towards this, and you do need to hit this shot, chances are you might be able to still get away with this and just sneak this. Maybe we might be able to get away with this shot here. So, I can kind of, just give you this case just as kind of a, and if I can do this, it would be kind of like max plus 10, max plus 20, somewhere in there. Somewhere in between this range, just depending on how strong it is. But again, you might not have the range to do this shot. You definitely won't be able to with a straight in the face. So, that'll pretty much be out of the question. And you can just kind of crank up the top spin, kind of cheat this landing zone just a little bit. Again, that is going to be, you know, a very tough shot. But let's just say, you know, we get this wind here. This might be the best solution for you, because going over here and aiming here, it's going to put a lot of guys in this sand. So what you'll have to do, you know, if this is my normal curl, what I'll need to do for this wind right here, you know, I'll have to stretch this arrow out potentially, you know, way over to here just to get enough curl to keep my second bounce from landing in the bunker. So with that in mind, you know, it might make for just a little bit too challenging. And again, it's also going to depend on your side spin ball, because, you know, if I'm landing over here, I'm probably going to be using a lot of left spin to even, you know, and in addition, still need curl to be able to even get this second bounce here. And you'll use your ball guide, you know, if this is my wind, for instance, you know, I'll need to make sure that this ball guide is at least on this line plus the curl, just to hold the line, just to hold this line. So you will need to play some kind of wind effect. Hopefully you're able to do so. And when we are talking about this case, let's take a look at the adjustment. I'll typically use relatively pretty close to max still. And this is primarily going to be just a headwind. I won't really I'll always do this iron shot for, so I'm not even really going to talk about it unless it's a headwind here. And with the headwind, you know, you're going to need to crank up this spin a little bit. Hopefully you have, you know, at least, I'd say, you know, 5 or 6 bars, somewhere in there. But it's going to be dependent upon, you know, your land zone as well. You're just going to have to kind of tweak this spot. And as I mentioned, you know, 5 to 6 bars is going to be ideal. And you'll just kind of use your ball guide. Keep in mind, if it's a headwind, you'll need to put it past the hole a little bit, because it will actually compress once the wind actually affects the ball. So that's typically what I'll be looking at there. You know, 5 to 6 bars will be pretty good. And I'll usually typically go pretty close to kind of max. It'll be somewhere between max minus 10%, which is very close to a mid adjustment, to max. So, you know, depending on how large the wind gets, if it gets up there 6, 7, 8 miles per hour, I can use max. If it stays relatively small, using max minus 10 or mid number is going to be much better for this land zone. And we won't really need to even talk about the side or tailwind. This is pretty much going to be the best shot for you at all cases. Even if, you know, we have a wind in this direction, you know, and it's down here and the wind's pointed this way, we're just going to kind of counter curl this way and just kind of try to get that ball guide straightened out by using this same landing zone. So hopefully that helps you guys. Good luck with this hole, and I'll see